This is Martin Shervington and welcome to Module 10 of Google Semantic Search with myself and David Ameland, who is the author of this book, Google Semantic Search. And in this module, David is going to demystify entities. Over to David.
When it comes to semantic search, entities is probably the hardest thing to totally understand. Because they're not words, they're concepts, although we used words to actually symbolize them. So, in a way, the easiest way to think about it is to think about perhaps something which you know well, like a car, a boat, a tree, and think how you know what it is. Yes, it actually stands for something very specific. But that specific thing, which is tangible in your world, as it is in mine, is associated with a knowledge graph. What it does. A boat floats on water, for instance, gets you from A to B. It can be used as for entertainment. It can be scaled up in size and used for transportation and so on. So all the things which you know about it are basically the knowledge graph, your own very personal knowledge graph, which get mapped onto the word in question, whether it's boat or tree or anything else, and it does something specific. And the thing is, the moment you actually learn a new language, and you find out that single word which means that same thing again. So you find the word for tree perhaps in French, which is arbre. Everything which you knew about a tree in English now gets mapped onto the new word in French, even though you may not be able to express it in French because you're not as fluent. So essentially that's the relation between an entity and a knowledge graph. And what is fascinating is that the word itself doesn't actually mean anything. There's a concept behind that which actually means all those things, which is defined by the qualities and quantities and attributes which it has. How does that help us? Well, essentially Google has in place an entity extraction mechanism which visits your website and in order to understand its value and its content and extract entities from it. When you create content on your website, it is really important to put in as much information as possible. And also make sure your website itself has as much information as possible. So if you have a physical place of business, for instance, and you have a website, and frequently people don't have a physical address because they think, I don't want anybody visiting me, I don't want anybody ringing up, I have a website so I can work through the web and via email. And yes, that is fine, but if you don't actually begin to join those dots to help Google understand that you're a real entity, have a real brick and mortar kind of existence, then you're missing out on an opportunity here. Similarly, you should have your contact details if you're a person. You should try and make it as easy as possible for people to reach you. You should have perhaps all the different areas on the web across which you can be found, if it's Google Plus or Twitter or Facebook. And by putting all this kind of information together, you're helping Google draw a clearer picture of who you are, what your business is, what you're about, which is, again, part of its entity extraction mechanism.
Next, let's take a look at the different content you could be considering using in different circumstances.
The need to actually think in terms of entities also affects the content which we create, because we don't create any more content which is based around keywords. Although we may still employ keywords in a very natural way in the content that we create, we don't start off with keywords in order to create the content in the first place. So how should we start off? What is the starting point for content creation? And the easiest way to think of this is that you need to start off with either an idea and explain it fully, or a question and answer it fully. And if you do that, then you're creating content which resonates a lot deeper, which is more likely to go viral. Certainly it will be better received, it will be engaged with better in social network setting, and also it will make it easier for Google to understand the real value of this content and actually extract all the necessary information from it, which will help your website appear in terms of different search queries in Google search. Content creation now becomes your primary tool. It always has been the case, but now it becomes your primary tool in terms of search as well. And content is not limited to text. It can be extremely good images, it can be video, it can be audio, you can do podcasts, you can do infographics. So essentially you need to think about the different ways you can present your content and try to be not just innovative and inventive for the sake of it, but actually in terms of what you think your target audience will need. And this is exactly what we've been talking about throughout this entire course, about the mindset shift that needs to take place. You need to think of your audience, their needs primarily, and yours second, and basically work in a way that makes it easy for them to understand who you are, access your content easier. So if they're on YouTube, for instance, you should have a presence there with a kind of video that will actually help them understand the value of what you do, and perhaps answer a specific question or a query that they may have. The same thing when you create pictures or you create podcasts, and that again now creates a kind of mindset where you need to think in different sort of modes. You need to think more visually and try to sort of project all your values and all your activities through those medium.
And in this last section, I've asked David about content, intentions, and the relationship with search.
Because search has changed, because content now surfaces in search, which is based on the intent of the search query, the content which you create has to be deeper. And let's actually examine this concept because it's fundamental in its shift from the old world of search to the new world of semantic search. Now, if you put down, for instance, in the old Boolean world, before the semantic web came along, before semantic search was implemented, if you were to put down a query like thin crust pizza, you would have there three words essentially: thin, crust, and pizza. And Google would look at those three words individually, try to assess them, give you some sort of probabilistic kind of results based on their presence on particular web pages. Now, if you got lucky, and if you're looking for a thin crust pizza recipe and you hadn't mentioned that, perhaps you would have got a page which actually had a kind of recipe. If you're hungry, you'd perhaps have a kind of restaurant coming up on your search which was near enough for you to order a thin crust pizza or go there and consume one yourself. In the semantic web, this works differently. The moment you put thin crust pizza, Google tries to guess the intention behind your query. It looks at time of day, it looks at your search patterns, your search history, your personalized search signal, what you normally do, whether if you're on your mobile device, it looks to see whether you're moving quickly or not, are you on foot, are you in a car, and so on. It becomes very detailed and very granular, and then that increases the context of the delivery of the answers, which means it also raises the quality, and it also increases the likelihood that they very precisely answer what you want. And they do that beyond just the words which you have actually spoken in voice search or typed in traditional Google search. And that approach also shows that the content which is created these days has to have that kind of mentality where it answers a question or fulfills a particular need. So if we use the thin crust pizza restaurant, for instance, this is something which you may not, and if you do have a restaurant like that, this is something which you may not automatically do because you're used to the fact that you have thin crust pizza, so you may have just pizza restaurant in your website. You may not have opening hours, you may not have a telephone number, you may have forgotten to actually link it up to Google Maps or put in a reference of what your address is, because you created a website to work through the web, take orders perhaps through the web. And this is wrong now. You need to actually join up all the dots. You need to help Google understand exactly where everything is, because using the phone on Google search, you're going to get your website.
That was Module 10 of Google Semantic Search with David Ameland and myself. And for Module 11, we're going to be looking at the 4 V's of semantic search. See you then.